Okay, welcome again, everybody, and especially welcome Dr. Gisela Perren-Klingler. I'm very glad and happy that you are willing and offering your time and your knowledge to come and join us here at the SE Ukraine Task Force. We have SEP, somatic experiencing practitioners all over the world, and many of them are now volunteers working with refugees, but also with helpers at the front line, or also in the countries around Ukraine or even further away. I met you, Gisela, just recently at the annual Congress of the Milton Erickson Institute of Germany, where you were holding a lecture, also a workshop about the prevention for the refugees. And I was very impressed also from your knowledge, and you have also written 2 books about it. So I thought it would be incredible if you would be willing to spend some time with us. So thank you very much for coming here, being here, Gisela.
Ja, ik heb hier geluid.
And here I am.
And
Yes.
here you are. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Rachi, for your introduction. And if you let me start, I start right away. Is that okay?
Maybe just 30 seconds that I tell the participants, just please, if you have any questions, you can write your questions in the chat. We will have an eye on it, that Gisela doesn't have to look at it, but we will have also time at the end. The most questions will be answered at the end after the lecture. Yes, just if you don't understand anything, then you can write this already during the lecture. And this lecture today will be recorded, that you know, because we have many requests from people who can't attend on such short notice tonight. They will have the chance to look at it later. And I have a co-moderator. This is my colleague, Hilary Witt. Hilary, is there anything from your side?
Yeah, as Raji said, you know, we'll have questions at the end. If there's anything that you need to ask, really to clarify, to understand something so that we can move forward, then go ahead and write that in the chat. And but chances are your question will be answered. So in the flow of what Gisela has to say. And if you'd like to rename yourselves and give us some idea about where you're from, that would also be interesting and helpful if you feel safe doing that. Thank you and welcome, everyone.
Oh, then it's up to you, Gisela.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rachi. Thank you, all the other organizers. Hello, good morning, good evening here in Europe. I just want to load my my PowerPoint again, and here it is. My theme will go around, well, I know that you want to know maybe more or to get more sure about prevention. And my thesis is that salutogenesis, the concept, should be the guiding principle in whatever we do when we have to deal with people who are marked by high or even excessive stress and now have a minimum of security in order to come down with from their high stress level, which means, of course, doing prevention for ongoing stress and telling them how to deal with it. Salutogenesis is a concept which was, why doesn't it work? Which works, in my view, very good in crises. I assume that you organize the people who come late and you let them just in. Yes, please, Rachi or whoever it is.
Definitely.
I want to first just start defining or giving you a definition of what is a crisis. Because the whole world has just emerged from one crisis, which was the pandemic, the crisis of the pandemic, where lots of, well, health professionals already had the big amount of stress, and not all of them didn't know how to deal with it. And just now we go, at least in Europe, we go into a second crisis, which is the crisis of the Ukraine. And of course, the crisis comes to us. Ukraine by itself is in war, and we have to be very clear with words, please. A crisis is an emergency, but it's an emergency, not the emergency of a cardiac arrest or something of a group who fell into, I don't know, who came into an avalanche just now in Switzerland, etc. But it's an emergency which concerns many people, and there are clusters of problems, and we don't know how these problems go together. And we do not have answers because it's so new and complex that we cannot foresee the process. We know what is the process after a catastrophe, when you have a hurricane, when you have a fire, etc. We know what are the processes. But in bigger crises, it is more complicated, and then it really can become crisis. It means that we must be very flexible. All of those who are dealing with it must be very flexible, being very attentive all the time to feedback loops. When we do in this tentative way, this and this, what is the feedback we get? Does it work? Does it not work? What do we have to adapt? What can we adapt, etc. And we need a lot of feedback from other people, but also from ourselves. And we have to give feedback because it's an interactive thing if we want to survive to a crisis. And what we know now very well from the pandemic is when you don't know, as we didn't know at the beginning, the way of infection from the virus, etc., then you need a lot of polyprofessional, multi-professional, cooperative also in order to go into prevention. This is finally what we tried to get in the pandemic. In the meantime, I think we have such a lot of knowledge that we more or less know how to deal with it. Now the questions are much more political than they were at the beginning. However, and that's very important, point number 3, in a crisis, you have to stay focused on your crisis and don't go into other things. You see the political freedom, as we had it in Switzerland, people very early starting saying this is a dictatorship of Mr. Berset, of our Minister of Health, etc. This is political question. This has nothing got to do with being focused on the crisis, which was people falling ill, getting infected without any handling possibilities at the beginning, etc. So it is very important to stay focused. That I think we already see that there is a lot of distraction from staying focused also with the Ukrainian refugees who come to our countries. And not only focused, but also positive about the outcome, which means we shall manage, or as Angela Merkel then said 5 years ago, we can deal with it. Yes, we can. We can deal with it, but we will make mistakes. That's not important. As long as we accept feedback and change when you see it doesn't work one way. Don't stick to what we have been doing by ideology or whatever. So these are the 3 parts to think of a crisis. And I personally think that especially for therapists, for people who have been working with other people half of a life or whole of a life, it is important to know we have to stay focused, and we have to stay focused on one thing, which is prevention with the Ukrainians. That's it. And of course, those who deal with them. That means also, I think, for example, the accepting families in all the parts of Europe where this has started, with volunteers who take refugees in their homes, etc. We have to stay focused on how they function and what they need in order to be able to go on with that. That's the first thing. The second is salutogenesis has 3 parameters, and I ask you to be clear with yourself that I'm going all the time to talk about the first 2 parameters. Antonovsky, who invented this concept, or who found this concept, which I think is very helpful, especially in emergencies, because it's very simple. He elaborated that on Holocaust survivors in the 70s. And his question was, what did these people do to be able, after the experience of Holocaust, to stay healthy? Healthy physically, and they were around 60 at that time, more or less, 60, going to pension, etc. Healthy physically, healthy mentally. Important, this does not mean that all these people have and still go on, if they still are alive, of suffering from what they have gone through, but not in the sense of suffering physical or mental illness, but human suffering for what has happened to me, for my shattered assumptions, for my family members I lost, etc. And these 2 parameters, manageability and comprehensibility, are the door openers so that people later on can find a meaning for what has happened to them. Find a meaning or create a meaning, because I think personally, violence, whenever we have to deal with it, violence per se is without any meaning. It's senseless, it's useless, it just hurts everybody. But this is not actual at the moment. Let's not look for meaning, but let's look with the people we are working with for manageability, for comprehensibility, and be very clear to ourselves that they suffer. And we also are going to suffer, because when we hear of suffering from other people, of course, our social engagement system, our parasympathetic nervous system is going to be affected also. But this is not our ill health or disease. It is just human being human. What do we see when the refugees come to our countries? That means now when they are arriving. What we can see is, of course, massive, huge stress reactions for the experiences these people have gone through. And the actual experience, it is stressful to move from Ukraine, I don't know where from, to Switzerland. It is stressful to move from Ukraine to any other place in Europe, because it's different. And it was not a primary choice. The primary choice was to stay home. So massive stress reactions we can observe. We can see here that these people have a lot of fear, linked, but real fear, not anxiety, just anxiety, but it's real fear. I went through this and this, and I risked my life for my kid or whatever. I fear for my parents who are there. I fear for my husband, my brother, whoever it is, who is still there. This is real fear. It's not anxiety. Important. That's different. Anxiety we can treat. Real fear is something else, and we can't treat it, and we shouldn't treat it, because it's a signal which says life is dangerous. We will see lots of very extreme emotions, because the stress, of course, amplifies every emotion. We will see sadness, disappointment, anger. We'll see all, or hear about all possible emotions in these people. Of course, also happiness that I made it, etc., etc. But still think that these emotions are not emotions in a, well, let's say adequate way, but they are all amplified, because stress is like a magnifying glass. We will see, hopefully in all of the people who arrive, curiosity and their will to adapt to a certain point here. And at the same time, of course, they have a lot of loyalty emotions, positive emotions, and sadness and fear for their left behind family members, etc. Now, that's only one part of the medal. The other side of the medal is, what do we see in the people who have to deal with the arriving Ukrainians? We have, I think, a lot of massive stress reactions because we have very often unilateral information. And we have unilateral information. Maybe it's not only bad, but sometimes it still is bad. We have unilateral information because it's a la mode here to be anti-Russian and pro-Ukrainian. Let's think of tomorrow. But we have a lot of stress reactions, and stress reactions where we can also be submitted to fake news, etc. People who will help, want to help as volunteers, will have a lot of identification with the victims, as they call them, victims, as they see them. Identification, of course, again, parasympathetic nervous system, social engagement system, reacts automatically, etc. And it's important to know that we'll have to deal with that. The people who receive refugees, they feel, as we all feel, very helpless. And probably one of the motivators to be volunteer, it has to do with the need to overcome the helplessness, salutogenetic, to control or to manage. However, this need, this wish to be useful, helpful, is very close to omnipotency. I want to do everything for the refugee, for my refugee and his or her daughter or son. So that's important, that helplessness is very close to the other side, omnipotency. We will have, and we will observe, added helplessness by not understanding different reactions of these people and a different culture. And we will perceive, and that's important because of focusing, as I said beforehand, in the crisis, we will perceive, and again, it's people who want to help other people, we will see our incapacity and feel it maybe very painfully. We will see our incapacity to help all other refugees we have in Europe, people who come from other war countries, let's say from Syria, from Afghanistan, etc., from sub-Saharan Africa, etc., etc. And we perceive it and we feel very bad, and we have a bad conscience about it. Now, again, stress amplifies all of these emotions. And what did we say at the beginning? Stay focused. We can't now just change the whole refugee politics of European countries with an asylum seeking start, etc., with listening to them and so on, by the normal process, which is different from the process the Ukrainians are going through. So let's stay focused. Now, what are we going to see, or what can we see in all people who have gone through high or excessive stress? Human beings have not thousands of ways of reacting to high stress, but they have three parts, or they have three choices. It's not that they choose it actively, but they have three ways of reacting. The first one is the stress model. They are over-aroused, they can't wind down, hyperactive, they seem aggressive, they run around, they laugh, they sob, they hyperventilate, and of course they have a high activating of their sympathetic nervous system, and it can't wind down stress reactions. The second group are people who are shocked. We say dissociated. They have no interest, no reaction, they give no response, they give no eye contact, and if you ask for it, it might be difficult to have it. As you know, I know that because I know a bit what you are doing, you know that the parasympathetic nervous system, the myelinated one, is blocked, so we don't have emotional responses, at least not to begin with. And because it was very excessive, maybe the unmyelinated parasympathetic nervous system has closed down to the playing opossum or to the death reflex. Third possibility to react is to regress. People get weepy, people complain, ask for attention, they clinch to the helpers and sort of let them do with me what they want and not what I want or what I would need. These three types are, as Shalev, an Israeli psychiatrist, psychotraumatologist, says, they are universal. That's very clear. You can see that now with the Ukrainians. We were able to see it with people from ex-Yugoslavia. We'll see it with people who come from Syria, etc., etc. They are universal and they are polymorphous. That means you can have a person who today is over-aroused and tomorrow is shocked, dissociated. And that means you can't think that you have in the same person every day the same reactions, which means, again, you have to stay focused and stay flexible. It is all three ways of reacting to stress are survival modus, and they are normal and natural. And I insist very much on both. They are normal because when you have high stress levels, then you react this way, and it's natural because it's for saving your life. Now, there are a few different concepts, and sometimes it's important to get conscious again about that. We have, in my view, we have three different concepts of stress. We have the biological one. Until now, I've been talking exclusively or nearly exclusively about the biological context, where we say stress is an adaptational performance of the organism in order to save life. There is a psychological concept where people are dismayed, have overwhelming feelings and sufferings. This is not very helpful at the moment to look at that too much because we are not going to intervene in that. And there is a very important third concept, which is the concept, the social concept, where Hopfall, who dealt with different catastrophes in the New World, speaks about and made his concept about resource disequilibrium. In a moment, I'm going to come back on that. Now, you know exactly what is going on in the biological concept of stress. It is developed when threat is perceived unconsciously, automatically, very short time. You have neuroception, which activates and deactivates the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system. You have the hormonal stress cascade, which then goes down to periphery, and we can see behavior due to that. And we have, which we don't see, activation and deactivation of different cerebral nuclei. Normally, the amygdala and all the other serotonergic parts of the brain are highly activated. And by that, inter alia, also the hippocampus is deactivated, prefrontal cortex, etc., which then explains, we can't see it, but it explains after that reaction, which we can see in the people. I'm not going to go into the psychological concept of stress. However, I'm going to just share with you the social concept of stress. Hopful says that stress starts based on a resource disequilibrium. And that produces, of course, reduced capacity to cope. When do we have this disequilibrium? We have it in 3 different situations. We have it when there is a threat of loss of resources. When the threat of losing my country, of losing my house, of losing my life maybe, or the life of one of my kids, or whatever it is there, this gives a lot of stress because I am in a disequilibrium. I'm fearing that I'm going to lose resources. There is the actual loss of resources. I see the A, which is to double, should be at the S, which is only one, a S, where you actually lose resources. I think I don't have to talk about that. House, family members, home, country, etc. And the third one is when you get no adequate profit after you have invested a lot of your resources, or also resources of other people. And that's important to know, because when I think at the moment, especially with our receiving families, they invest a lot of goodwill. They invest sharing their house with other people, etc. They invest a lot. And of course, they expect at some point a profit. It is not, I give you so that I get, but of course, they need something which says, yes, I don't know, thank you, for example. That is also already quite a big thing. But they need to see that it was worthwhile to invest. Stress, as you know, can be seen at the biological, at the social, and at the systemic level. Let's not forget the systemic level. Now, what do people need after high stress exposure? They need security. This is what Hopful says, who wrote about the equilibrium. They need security and calmness. Maybe not security in the Swiss concept of having a bank account, etc., but calmness and security, a roof over your head, food, drinking, occupation, etc. The second thing which goes with it is relation with other people. It's not only Zoom, it has to be by touching. They need self-efficacy at an individual level. They need to feel that they can control again, salutogenesis. They need to see, not only to feel, to see that they can make differences when they become active. And they need self-efficacy at community levels, systemic level. Important because we have Swiss communities, we have Ukrainian communities, we have helper communities, etc. And all these people who are helping have to, I think, from the very beginning, be very conscious about how do we enhance the self-efficacy at an individual level, and maybe at small groups level. Teachers who say, yes, I can deal with the refugee kids from Ukraine, etc. And the last thing is hope. Hope is essential, hope that things will be different in the future. This is actually what people need after high stress exposure. And I assume that you already have a lot of ideas what you can do with these 5 needs when you intervene. What is important is that these needs are better attended by peers than by professionals, because peers are less dangerous. Psychiatrists, psychologists gives the feeling that I'm crazy. A teacher, etc., who wants to teach me means that I'm, well, there is somebody who wants to boss me, etc. Peers, lower threshold of help seeking because they are similar. And of course, they also lower the threshold because they should be cultural peers, They have linguistic capacities and experiences which are similar to what the other one has. Now we have 3 actions. Number 1 is prevention. First step is, don't think of that again, security and calmness, lower the stress level at the somatic level. This creates calmness, this creates also the feeling of safety. When I don't hyperventilate anymore, when my cardiac rhythm is again normal, let's say 60 or something like that, then I feel more secure than when my heart is running, etc. That's important, and it's the first step. It's not enough to speak to people, but it's important to make them feel that they are safe on their somatic level. They need relation, as I said, not only by Zoom, but through outreach. We have to go for them. And especially psychologists, I don't know how many of you are psychologists, therapists also, who have an individual approach to therapy. They normally sit in their offices and wait for patients. No, you have to do outreach and to go to people, to explain to them, to ask them, what do you need? What do you want, etc. Asking for what can you do? What do you want to do today? Not in 5 months, now. Again, I already said it, they need, what do we do to enhance self-efficacy at a community level? And how do we organize hope? Hope is a nice word, and of course every religion speaks about hope. It's not that what I mean. Hope is tomorrow is open, a grain of hope every day. So what are we going to do tomorrow? What is our program for tomorrow? What are you going to do with your kid tomorrow, etc. And this is preventative. It's not mini therapy. It's not neither EMDR nor any other elaboration of emotions, for example. It's very important to stay in this part where we do teaching and guide people to have these 5 points again of hopeful. Include systems. Action 2, keep cool. Stay focused on your task. Let yourselves not be distracted. Neither you, nor the Ukrainians, nor the Swiss families, nor the Swiss helpers. That's a distraction can come later, and maybe we learn a lot of things for our refugee politics on a long term, but this is not the moment. This is a future part. Stay focused at the cognitive level and do dissociate. I didn't say this amount, but this amount from emotions. Calm yourselves, wind down your own stress. Don't get distracted. I already said it. Respect your own stress. That's very important, and lower it. Do it every day. You can't be a helper who is stressed. You have to stay calm, otherwise you can't give the security and the calmness to the other one who needs it, be he now from the Swiss family who receives, or be it a refugee, or she a refugee. Keep hope for yourself and for the others. Every day, at least doing one good thing for yourselves. It doesn't mean listening to a symphony over an hour, but enjoy a beautiful view when you travel through Switzerland or wherever you go. Enjoy a good meal, enjoy a chat with a friend, with a refugee, maybe even, enjoy every day very consciously one good thing. And of course, that's part of resilience. Enjoy it through all your senses. And number 3, and I'm nearly finished, is exercise salutogenetic phrasing. I invented that with a dear colleague, a psychiatrist from the Ticino, Luca Genoni, where we trained teachers in prevention after critical incidents. And it was until we did that, sort of very often things were not talked about. The suicide of a pupil in middle school, or suicide of a parent, of course, an illness, a death of a kid, etc. They didn't talk. And we had a lot of work to do in persuading these teachers that they don't do good things to their kids when they silence it and don't talk about it. And finally, in our desperation, how do we make it easy for them? We developed this, what is right here. And of course, you can after that adapt it, but this is the skeleton of the phrasing. And first you have to do it for yourselves. And maybe after that, you can also do it for other people. It is true that X, the trauma, has happened, that you had to flee. And it is also true, and it's important the way I formulated it. It's and, it's not but. It's and it is also true that you can do a small thing now, that you can do why now. Salutogenesis, huh? Be active. Do something which you can do. It's not save the world, have all the refugees from Ukraine satisfied. No, it's activity that I can do this and this tomorrow with one of my refugees. I put you a few examples and then I'm finished. Yet it is true that humans have been slaughtered in Bucha. And today, here, you have the possibility to prepare your kid for going to school tomorrow. Of course, it has to be true. You can adapt it, of course. Yes, your youngest kid has drowned in the Mediterranean. And today we can organize an excursion for our kids. I know it's hard to hear it. Yes, we all know that your man chose to stay back home. That's now for the Ukrainians. And here we can, you can prepare every day something for your return home. It has to be specific and practical. Or action 3A. Now for the receivers. It is true that the images from Bucha make me helpless or angry or sad or anxious or whatever it is. And it is also true that today I can go with my refugee, my host, to register for school for her kid. Yes, unfortunately, a cruel war is going on in Ukraine. And so I can offer my empty room to a refugee during 2 months. Also, think of cutting down expectancy towards oneself. I don't know whether I could stay with somebody in my flat for more than 2 months if I don't know him. Yes, I really have a bad conscience because of other refugee groups. And it is still true that I can care for the health of this Ukrainian grandmother. The structure, I put it on here once again, it is recognition of the fact as difficult. Use and not but, because then you link two things together. And mention and organize an activity where actual needs are addressed, which means where people can really be self-efficacy. That's the structure. And before you start doing that with people, do it for yourselves. With that, I thank you for your attention and I'm open to questions or comments or whatever you want.
Thank you very much, Gisela. So maybe you could put out
that's what I'm going to do.
Slides.
Here they are. So now I assume that you can see me. I just have to now
see you, and maybe
you see me.
Yes.
Okay.
That you close sharing your screen.
Okay.
At the top, probably, yes, perfect. So wonderful, wonderful. Just the last few slides, actually, because we are all here, most of us are SEPs. That was a very
What is
important
SEP? What is
somatic experiencing practitioner.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
Yep.
So that was a very important principle. We all know in SE what we use. This connecting language of the word and, to connect something out of the trauma vortex, connecting with something out of the resource vortex.
May I just interrupt you, and don't say trauma, say please stress basket.
Stress basket, very
because
good.
Otherwise you pathologize it immediately,
yes,
and then
right.
you have all refugees are traumatized and all these stupid things.
That's a very nice word. Whatever comes out of the stress basket,
exactly,
we recognize it and we combine it, connecting it with, and we can do today this and this, or whatever is possible. Wonderful. So this is really a very important SE concept we have. But let's see what the participants have as questions for you.
Or as just wanting to share. Maybe they don't have questions.
Share too. I'm sure there are a lot of things. So maybe
can you hold up your hands when you want to have the floor, please?
Yes,
because Rachi is going to give me then to give you the mic and the picture.
Yes. So you might need to put the video on, everybody, that we can see your hands, or in the chat, or your remarks, or anybody who wants to share. I know I saw a lot of colleagues, and I know also there are people who are hosting actually refugees, or hosts of refugees themselves.
I think that I can see Janice Wood.
Yeah. Yes. I just wanted to say that I feel so positive, so hopeful listening to this talk, because in my head, I think, oh, all of these people come with trauma. And it's like, duh, that doesn't have to be. And that's been the most wonderful piece of hope that gave me. And yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. Thank you so much.
May I just give you a comment? You see, I think we did this, let's say trauma history is very short, yes, in psychology. It's since the 80s only. And I can remember that when I first introduced the concept of trauma in Switzerland, I was Madame Psychotrauma at that time. And then we were occupied with the refugees from the Balkans, with all the bad knowledge we also had. And of course, we were also affected. And many of us really thought in trauma terms. And I think it is so important to go away from that. If you see what is going on in, let's say, in ex-Yugoslavia, where there is such a lot of enemies still, one against the other, this has got to do with not integrated stress. And of course, chronic not integrated stress can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. It can also lead to depression and dissociation, etc., etc., etc. And then I had the chance of meeting a young man who works in Rwanda. And Rwanda is a modern state who has done a lot of research on mental health in his population. And they found out that they have 20% of people who are or depressed or PTSD, etc. That means ill, psychologically ill. And the Ministry of Health said, we don't have the resources to deal with that. And this man stepped in, psychologist, and said, we want a healing and peace enhancing process. And he trained in the meantime over 2,000 peers. They are called multiplicators, it doesn't matter how they are called. and they have a clear program. I think it's very large, but it's also quite a long time ago since Rwanda happened, Kigali. It's the same amount of time as ex-Yugoslavia, as the Kosovo crisis. And they could show that when they do this program, which starts with breathing and with body-oriented exercises, etc., and with community from the beginning, there are always 10 people together trained. And the goal is that they, all of them, help each other also on the social level, outside from the training. And they could show that all the scales, depression they didn't measure, I think they didn't know about it enough. But PTSD, depression, etc., went down to half. School attendance of kids went up. Working attendance of these people went up again, etc., and quality of life. So that means let's forget trauma, at least when we go into prevention. Yeah, and turn our eyes to, now you can say, I prefer to say salutogenesis, because there you have only 3 factors, whereas if we turn to resilience, you have 17 factors, which I think makes the concept very difficult. Let us turn to salutogenetic view and to the resources of every person. I finished with my preaching.
Thank you, Gisela. And I have a question coming in. May I read it to you, Gisela?
Please go ahead.
When you host refugees with children,
yes,
how to speak about the war? How much to speak about it in presence of refugee children? How to react when mother or father of the refugee children speak very much about the war while making phone calls to Ukraine and kids are in the same room?
I think, first of all, we know that from other refugee situations all over the world. Kids, because of that, love to go to school and to escape home. And I would first of all say, give the kids the chance to really get out of house every day for hours, far away from mom. Yeah, number one, with other kids. And they can be Swiss kids, they can be Ukrainian kids, it doesn't matter. Better if it's mixed, because when it's bicultural, they will learn very soon our dialect or the language of the other host country. And I think what kids have the right is to be able to be taken seriously for whatever they have seen. Yes, it is true that you saw your granddad in the road dead, blah, 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 blah. Can you tell me what you saw? So you don't interpret, but the kid can talk about it or paint it or picture it. Yes, I have developed a lot of techniques for that. I think it's very important to take them seriously, because if you don't talk, if you don't listen to them and accept their reality, and again, now let us phrase it salutogenetically. Yes, it is true that your grandfather has died, or you have seen your grandfather this way. And it is also true that today we can, now of course, don't forget the grandfather, first that we can send him a good thought. What would you like to tell him? What would you like to tell your father who is still alive? What would you like to tell him in the evening, what you did? Don't tell him that you worry. Tell him a nice thing you did today, wherever it is, in Winterthur or in Bern or wherever it is. And elaborate that kids, that gives hope, and it keeps the bonding part. And I think that's very important for kids who have left part of their family. But don't silence it. Don't go into emotions. Yes, you are sad. Let us do something. Not let's go into emotion. Yeah, we are not therapists. We are preventative. Let's do, I don't know what, let's write a letter to daddy or whatever you want. Yeah, where relation, one of the important needs after stress exposure, is enhanced. But of course, there you yourself have to be sure that you don't dive into terrible emotions, because the kid will feel it. And then he will never ever talk to you again. That we know that from the first Iraq war, from kids from Kuwait, what they wrote after that. Yeah, and they seemed, parents thought, teachers thought, everybody thought that they were, after a year, they had resolved it. And then Adle Direkhoff, who works a lot with kids, spoke to the kids and said, what is going on? And they said, we feel exactly the same thing as a year ago, because he didn't treat them. He just made twice an evaluation. We feel the same thing. We have flashbacks and so on and so forth. But we know they don't want to hear it, because they want us to show that we are happy. That's double pressure on the kid. That's unfair. And if you as helpers, as intervenant people do that, and that kids feel that you get upset when they talk to you, they won't talk to you anymore. So please, and don't forget, I give you just there has been a very, very good little booklet written by, it's a Palestinian, the name is Mona Maksoud is her name, Mona Maksoud. And it's called Helping Children Cope with the Stresses of War. It's very well done. Don't make a new one. We have translated it in the Yugoslav crisis here into Serbo-Croatian, into German, into French, into Italian, into Kosovo, into Albanian. Now, maybe you can translate it into Ukrainian, because it's really good for people, for parents and teachers. And it's adapted to kids. So you can load it down by UNICEF, at UNICEF, because I don't have any, it long has been sold out, and you can't have it on the market anymore. But you can load it down in English, and I don't know whether you can also load it down in French or in German, but probably you don't need that. English is enough.
Thank you for this advice. This is excellent. So we will look if we can find the download of UNICEF and add it also to this lecture. So let me just repeat the title of this book.
Yes.
Helping Children to Cope with War.
With the stresses of war, not with trauma, with the stresses of war. And when we are already mentioning written things, I have a handout for people who have gone through extreme stress in many languages, of course, not in Ukrainian. And I have the same handout for kids. And maybe that could help you. So if you want it, Rachi, you have to contact me. Yeah?
Definitely, I will. Be sure.
And then you can share it with the others.
So there's one more question. We still have time. I will read it to you, Gisela.
Yes, okay.
Gisela made a distinction between resilience and salutogenetics. I would like to understand a bit more about this distinction you made.
The distinction is, if I look at people who have a way of coping in a salutogenetic way, they are resilient. Yeah? What we see will be the same. But if we intervene, especially in emergencies, if you have 17 factors to look after, this hinders you to work immediately. Whereas when you have two things, which means manageability, that's self-efficacy, by the way, individual management, manageability and understanding, then you have the core for resilience. And I like very much the concept of Emmy Werner about resilience. I was a child psychiatrist, but in emergencies, you can't use it. Does that help the one who wrote the thing? Can you ask her? I don't know who, or was it you who said it?
Yes, thank you. I said it.
Okay.
And I was wondering about the 17 factors, but I understand the salutogenetics is the first 3 parts, are the manageability and the understanding that you mentioned in the first sheet, which is the main focus we have in stress. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think, you see, if you go through the 17 factors, of course, you have factors of management and the factors of understanding. Yeah, it's not different, and they don't exclude each other. I think just they are easier to manage, and we have stress, right?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you, and thank you, Gisela, especially from a lot of people for this lecture. It was very clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you. I saw it.
Yes, Gisela. So thank you, Gisela, very much for your time. We really appreciate that you were voluntary to come here and stay with us and teach us.
Okay, take care, all of you. I hope, go with hope and look after yourselves, please.
Definitely, we will do that.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Gisela.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gisela.
Bye.
Thank you so much.